My name is Jerm. This is Germ Warfare, the battle of ideas. Matthew Ehret, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
All right, Jerm, always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's been a process trying to get you on because you've been oversleeping.
I've been, and then, my mother had to deal with a certain infestation at her place, and then that screwed up one of our attempts. But here we are. It finally worked out.
Funny you say that. We had a infestation just a few days ago, not of whatever it is that you had. We had some weird kind of ant, but like a really, really big ant. And I don't know where they came from, but they have been destroying my wife's flowers.
Yeah, ants. I always liked ants. They're very communal, and it's fun to watch them all like look out for each other and stuff. But once you get them in the garden, they're
communists, dude.
Bastards.
They're communists.
They're communists ultimately. Yeah.
Well, hang on. There's a segue.
Yeah.
So let me start off by asking you a question. Why is Xi Jinping Hitler?
Why? Well, if you were a radical black-pilled anarchist, it would be because Xi Jinping uses big government to do things. And in the syllogistic formula that is prevalent amongst many, not all, but many among the radical ideological anarchist groupings who are in the alternative media space, they've come to this weird formula that is very simplistic, but that asserts that because if anybody uses government to do things, then that person is just like Hitler, because Hitler used government to do things, and JFK and Franklin Roosevelt and Lincoln used government to do things, just like in our modern world, Xi Jinping is using government to build infrastructure and harmonize action for long-term things, just like Hitler. And that act alone puts them all in the same basket as being equally tyrannical, dictatorial, pushing things down the road to serfdom. And it really is pretty simplistic, because the idea of like, well, are they doing good things or bad things? Are the principles animating the policies of, let's say, Hitler's Nazi Germany, Lincoln's greenback system in America, and Xi Jinping's policies over the last 10 years under the Belt and Road Initiative, are they good? Are they in harmony with natural law? Are they bad? Are they medievalist, feudalist programs to enslave the masses? No regard for that. It doesn't matter. That question is irrelevant in the ideological sort of package that comes with many who are of the again, radical anarchistic sort of viewpoint that is of the nature that I attacked a little bit, or at least I polemicized against a little bit in my recent article, how Xi Jinping became Hitler, that you just referenced.
So this is what the conversation is premised on. It's that Substack. And the reason why it caught my attention, and we won't obviously go into names, but it basically, it's basically a kind of response to a number of various attacks that you, Cynthia, and me, and many others have experienced over the last few months. But what's actually more important is the framework that you have laid out. It's very complex. So if you don't mind, start off with like a simplified version, and then let's go into it.
Yeah, sure. The idea that originally I was struggling with whether or not I was going to respond, since these attacks, which really, at least I've noticed, at least began heavily in 2025, right around Trump's second term, when the anti-China program became much more virulent. It had already been going on in Trump's first term, especially in 2020. It really started getting ugly with COVID, and then under the Biden regime, it expanded, and it I would say amplified in a much more vicious manner, both in the rhetoric used to paint the image that China is this evil entity, but then in action, as far as the policies of putting al-Qaeda into power in Syria, the overt, it's very clear for anybody who actually just looks for it, that one of the top ambitions of U.S. foreign policy since really, March of 2025 has been just destabilize China, destabilize the broader Eurasian area, the Belt and Road initiatives, the ports, the maritime Silk Road, the north-south transportation corridor that has been built up very carefully and systematically over many, many years by Russia, China, Iran, has played a very, very important role. And all of these things have been systematically targeted, right? And the idea is to just increasingly destabilize Eurasia, since Eurasia has, according to Zbigniew Brzezinski, represented the only, especially the Russia-China Iran alliance, has represented the only possible serious threat to the New World Order that was envisioned by some of the 1990s championing an end of history. So anyway, Cynthia and I have been for many years very close China watchers, following the policies of the Belt and Road Initiative. We've given many conferences going back to 2014, public conferences talking about what is the strategic value, what is the quality of cultural thinking that has been revived, especially through China's leadership around Xi Jinping. What are the battles of the Chinese deep state? So we've mapped a lot of these things out. What about the Russian deep state architecture? What are its origins? How does it influence for the bad things inside of Russia? Inversely, where are the patriots? What are the deeper, better traditions that have been organized and revived against this other agency? Just like we've done mapping out in the West, sort of similar exercises to see, well, like, what are the good, viable parts of U.S. history, of European history, and what's this other thing? What's this other very evil agency, this parasite that's latched on for centuries, if not millennia? So we've been doing this exercise, trying to make it public, and it became more and more clear that there was an effort to really, really destabilize China's efforts to build an alternative framework of cooperation based on long-term thinking. Really, some of the best ideas that I've found that animated the West when we were not crazy yet has been targeted. And around that same time, I started finding that there were an increased array of attacks on anybody in the sort of, I guess you can call it the alternative media information space. UK Column, you guys, Cynthia, myself, we started getting these different slanders, strangely, that just increased month to month. And then in 2026, we saw a really big spike of different things that were painting all of us as just China shills, multipolar maxing China shills.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me just jump in there. I want to brag, if you don't mind, because I am one of the very few people that I know of who's actually been to the heart of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I hope you are very jealous, Matt.
I am. Yeah, you got to see with your own eyes. I've only been to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau. Cynthia's been to the mainland.
No, that's far away.
It is. No, you've actually been to Xinjiang, eh?
And more specifically to Kashgar and the actual cities where the Belt and Road Initiative is what's the word? Not founded. It's where the central nervous system of the Belt and Road Initiative actually is. It's an incredible thing to see. People don't understand the magnitude of what they are doing. And I think it's because of that area is politically sensitive, because you have MI6 and you have every Western intelligence agency trying to destabilize that region. And
what did you encounter when you were in Kashgar and Xinjiang? Was it a horror show of Uyghur genocide and enslavement of the people, or what was it like? What did you?
It was there were just bodies lying everywhere. Yeah, we went to a Uyghur wedding in, I think it was Kashgar, where shame those poor people. They were having the last party ever.
If you cite statistics proving the increased longevity, the increased number, overall quantity of population of the Uyghurs, if you cite these different things, the provable, demonstrable increased demographic standards alone, just on an objective level, access to electricity, access to fresh running water over the past 50 years, and just like bring that to the surface, that's still just Chinese propaganda. You can't believe it. They never let truth out. And then if you put somebody actually on the ground with eyes to see and to go and talk to the people, Were you being curated? Did you have the Chinese
No,
soldiers?
Matt, even police
Yeah.
in Xinjiang are Uyghurs.
Well, there you go. Right. I mean, yeah. Well, so you can't win.
But it is a fairly militarized province, compared to the rest of China. But again, as Carl has said, it's because of the attempts to destabilize the region. But we're going off topic a little bit here. The point is that me saying something positive, or let me rephrase it, me not trashing China makes me a China maxer. So I've experienced a lot of these similar attacks. But the other one that's actually for me more interesting, which your article deals with, and I want you to just expand on it a bit, is unipolarity versus multipolarity, and what is going on in that dichotomy.
Well, and this is the thing, right? It's like for the novice who I don't think is watching your show right now. I think everyone's probably adept at this language, but it's been recognized that there's sort of different ways of imagining the organization of the world, which encompasses different nation states, different cultural traditions, different individuals. Clearly, so there's a lot of individuation, different differences, but then how do we live together, right? And on the one hand, you have the Leviathan crowd, the Hobbesian groupings who have the view that the only way to ever have peace and stability is through some Leviathan, some hegemon from above the nations, above the game, imposing some form of rules that keep basically keep feudalism in place, that keep everybody from naturally killing each other, which is what we would do as beasts, as human beings are only capable of being selfish, consuming, drawing down resources if left to our own devices, and thus resulting in conflict with our neighbors, conflict with those who think or speak or look differently. And it's a very cynical way of defining human beings, but the British Empire around Thomas Hobbes really organized their entire existence. I would say every modern empire organized its foreign policy, its domestic policy around some variation of that Hobbesian of the Leviathan, of the hegemon. And that more recently became the unipolar notion in more recent, I'd say, since this collapse of the Soviet Union, right? That we're in the end of history, that now, it's only a matter of tying up loose ends as this supranational one world government run by an unelected caste of high priests is brought in to impose order from above. The other alternative idea to that has been the notion that, no, we can coexist together, we can have faith, that we won't naturally just go to war unless there's maybe intelligence agencies stoking the fires of arson between countries and maybe funding, terrorist cells and Islamist extremist or whatever extremist you want to imagine on the list of possibilities. If you don't have the MI6s and the CIAs doing that, then we would naturally find ways to work together, to play together, to find solutions to objectively clear problems that encapsulate the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Muslim, the Jew, the Christian. Everybody would naturally orient themselves to looking for what makes us human, to respect our differences, while not just evangelizing or trying to impose what we think the world should be onto our neighbors. That would be the more optimistic idea of human nature. And that one, in a practical political sense, became increasingly termed, I'd say over the last 30 years or so, the multipolar option. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that cannot be perverted into something evil either. So I'm acknowledging that there is an evil kind of Orwellian idea of multipolarity. And I think when you hear, Klaus Schwab was for a period even saying that multipolarity is the new world order. He was saying the words. Does he have an idea of that? Of what that means? That's not necessarily unipolar. No, I would say it's just a different species, a different coloring of a unipolar in his mind. It's not the same meaning as when a Xi Jinping or a Putin has said those very same words. And there's in the mind of, let's say, a Rubio, of a neocon, of a Klaus Schwab, I would say it's much more Orwellian. It's much more based, if you think about the construct of what George Orwell laid out for what he envisioned the future world order to be. You had a Eurasia, an East Asia, an Oceania, representing essentially the Anglo-American sphere of influence that would always be used as sort of the these fascist jurisdictions, run by a common control, mind you, that would always be kept in a state of apparent perpetual war from bottom up. From that perspective, it would seem like they're constantly at war, but they would, in a calculated way, shift so that the enemy, where Eurasia was fighting Oceania 5 years ago, now all of a sudden Eurasia is the enemy, and East Asia is Eurasia is the ally, and East Asia becomes the new enemy, and things just flip around in this world of. So there is this, like Count Coudenhove-Kalergi had a similar idea of an evil multipolarity. That was partially why Coudenhove-Kalergi slipped in after Roosevelt was dead in the San Francisco UN conference, Articles 52 to 56, where Richard Coudenhove, the founder of Pan-Europa, the pan-European fascist movement that brought in membership, including networks around Mussolini, around Hitler's banker, Hjalmar Schacht, many of the Thurn and Taxis members of the House of Habsburg, even Otto von Habsburg himself actually was a member of this pan-Europa fascist structure. The CFR members, all of the members of the Council on Foreign Relations, were promoting the Coudenhove-Kalergi agenda. Now, he brought in these articles at the founding conference of the UN, which should have never been in the UN Constitution, Articles 52 to 54, 56, which allowed for the creation of these regional blocks. So those articles allowed for something that should have been illegal, which is the creation of the European Union, which was always the idea, is to strip nation states, individual nation states, of their ability to have any sovereign say in their destiny, and move those aspects of the nation state, banking, military, political harmonization, to entities of unelected bureaucrats, which is what the European Union always was designed to be, as an anti-nation state regional bloc. NATO was created based upon the legal arguments made possible by Article 52, the Kalergi article. And so again, that was designed to get away from, to create again, militaristic supranational entities that were then able to oversee things like Operation Gladio, the secret army apparatus. So there's this evil version that some would like to see the world adopt, an evil multipolarity. I'm of the view, and I think the evidence does speak quite well in support of what you've experienced, what you've evaluated, what Cynthia and I, and what the many other people who actually look at this, who look at these variables. I think we're all of the view that there is still this healthy multipolarity that is being fought for and defended, which is particularly why China is so strategically attacked, both in terms of slander, but also in terms of asymmetrical warfare all across the board, and has been now for a number of years, because they're representing a genuine threat to those structures who would like to have this more, they don't care, either an evil unipolarity or multipolarity. They don't care. They just want feudalism from the standpoint of this Anglo-American dominant axis managing so much of the Western world.
You make a very good point in terms of definitions and how we understand them. I'll give you just a practical example. The word communist, we were joking about it at the start of the conversation. Now, if you ask your average American what is a communist, and you ask an average Chinese what is a communist, you're going to get two very different responses. So when somebody talks about multipolarity, what exactly are they talking about? Ultimately, that's what you're actually trying to break apart.
Yeah, I'm trying to get at the exactly the meaning of the terms, because we get, I think, a little trapped into nominalism. Nominalism is a great way to brainwash somebody, because if you can get everybody to think that a particular word has a very fixed definition to it, then it's very easy to take a complex, nuanced subject and oversimplify it so that people actually don't understand what they're talking about. And I think everybody has experienced this, where you're having a conversation with somebody, you're using the same words, and then you come to realize into the conversation that gets more contentious that you don't mean the same things with the words that you're using. You see this with capitalism too, right? Some people have a very healthy idea of capitalism because their idea of it is premised on the idea of personal competition, incentive, creativity, taking responsibility for your ideas. Like there's a certain healthy aura about some good notions of capitalism. Other people have a very bad idea of it because they've just been looking at different ways capitalism has been used as a cover by the British East India Company or by Monsanto or these other, behemoth multinational agencies like Palantir, and they've just been looking at the fact that these things have been growing under the guise of capitalism, but in fact have been really covers for feudalism with a capitalist front. As Peter Thiel even said in a lecture to, I think it was Harvard students, that the purpose of the new capitalism is not competition but monopoly. And that's easy coming from a guy who's been a cardboard cutout for the military-industrial complex and the CIA since his early days at Stanford. Because he's never actually had to compete for anything. He's always just had things given to him, just like Jeff Bezos at Amazon. With Amazon, it's destroyed small and medium enterprises all over North America and beyond who can't compete with the type of incentives and no shipping charges for anybody who has an Amazon Prime subscription. That's very convenient. Next day shopping, click of the button. Next day you're going to get a package in the mail with whatever you want. So would they exist though? Do they have a business model that allows them to exist without government subsidies? Could they have ever existed without massive government subsidies in the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars? No, they could not. That's not capitalism. So, again, the people are using the same word and then they're like, no, their ideas are totally different. And the same thing, like you said, for communism, Xi Jinping, a typical Chinese person's idea of the word is very different from the Marxist on a New York University campus who's thinking about burning down civilization and redistributing the wealth after they eat the rich. It's a very different notion.
A good example of your capitalism argument is if I want one of your books sent to me, it's extremely expensive to ship from your side of the world to me. Amazon does it at a stupidly low rate. So now I have to now buy your book off Amazon if I want to get it to me cheaply.
Yeah, exactly. And that's only because Amazon receives subsidies from municipal, from state, from provincial, from federal agencies. There's all sorts of different incentives in Canada, where we have the Canadian Postal Service that's been around since it was founded by Benjamin Franklin in the 1750s. They've been systematically just crippled because there has been a slow maneuver to take down a lot of these agencies, and then replace the only way that they're even surviving is that they've been forced to, on the one hand, cut the budget and fire so many of their staff. So the few who do work are underpaid young people who don't get reliable hours. They don't get to know what hours are going to be there in 2 weeks. So it's impossible to have to plan a family. You don't know if you're going to earn enough money to pay your bills. You have to work a second job. So it's already like only the old employees who've been around since the 70s or the 80s still have sort of a reliable income, but they're overworked as well. And then they're integrating Amazon services with the Canadian Postal Service. So they're increasingly phasing it out as Amazon is being brought in to have a privatized system. But again, it's a weird kind of privatization because it's only being made possible by this weird agency that has taken over the state and that has been using the instruments of the state over the past decades, especially since JFK was murdered. But to then prop up these new vetted, seemingly private agencies, and we've seen this as well with the new space movement, Jeff Bezos's Blue, whatever it is, his private space agency, and Elon Musk's private space agencies, and Richard Branson, and this whole idea. This is something that didn't exist in the 90s. It was entirely made possible through, again, government subsidies, a lot of military industrial contracts as well, that gave all of these, again, seemingly private entities a massive, unholy edge to just destroy anybody trying to do what they do is impossible because they have the support of the security state, of the deep state, of the In-Q-Tel operations, which is the CIA's venture capital front that vetted these particular individuals to be the selected front men who will then be used to build up Palantir, to build up Starlink and SpaceX and, everything in between, Virgin, you name it, so they would have what appears to be private billionaire tourism on the moon and casinos on the moon and mining operations on asteroids and beyond, which I'm not against mining in space. I think it could be cool, but it's like part of the systematic destruction of NASA, of the national space agencies that were created by JFK, that are a little bit too much tied into the institution of the sovereign nation state per se, which I would say has been a long-term mission of this oligarchy, this financier oligarchy, has been the destruction of the sovereign nation state in order to replace it with a one-world government, because the sovereign nation state is a relatively new institution in the grand scheme of things, and it was something that was fought for in a freedom movement over centuries, especially since the Italian Renaissance, and it emerged out of that idea that, no, people can have a say in their destiny. It's not just the kings and the hereditary lords who have the right to determine the course of action of a nation, of a civilization, but it's everybody can be not just simply a serf-like subject to be, played with as mercenaries or as farmers for a plantation owner, but everybody could become a citizen and thus participate through vote, through participation town halls, through union organizing, in some form of amplitude or another, with the general policies that are going to affect their kids and grandkids and the lives of everybody to come afterwards. And that was a very new, innovative idea, and it built up. There was always a fight, but unfortunately, many amongst those who have positioned themselves to be influencers within this very dark media space, since there is a lot of darkness, a lot of evil, a lot of Satanism that has been trying to stay in the shadows over centuries, that, thanks to the internet, and it's great that we have the ability for people like you and me to actually have a voice, which in the 90s and the 80s and in the pre-internet age would have been unthinkable. You had to have gotten in good with a publishing house, meaning you had to probably agree to certain terms and conditions with those who had the big controls to get your book published and accessed in bookstores or magazine shops in order for your voice to have any influence. Now all of a sudden that's not the case anymore. But there is a disproportionately large number of people, just because I think they're maybe a bit on the younger side in many of the cases, under 50s, 15 younger in many cases. They've only experienced hypocrisy, corruption. They didn't live through John F. Kennedy. They weren't alive when Bobby Kennedy was giving his speeches. They didn't have a living memory of anything sane. And so it has become very easy to simply get blackpilled and just say, well, the entire idea of hope, the idea of a fight against this empire is an illusion. It's never been that. The evil that America is today is the evil it always has been. And so anybody trying to look for any positive angle on a fight is either a fool or they're a chaos agent that's out to give you false hope, and don't trust them. And that applies to the past, or it applies to the current configuration of our living world today, as far as those who, like us, identify that there are fights by legitimate people who are not genocidalists, who are wielding political influence and are resistant to this new world order, great reset, depopulation agenda to bring back feudalism. So,
Matt, what you just said there has been a frustration of mine for quite a while, and I love what you said in your Substack. Your opening few paragraphs actually point to this. Let me read what you said here. Pretty much anyone you thought represented a movement towards goodness can easily be reframed as a villain, because you should be aware that there has never been a fight for goodness against evil which wasn't controlled by evil. That is what you were just talking about, the ultra-cynical, black-pilled, dark reading of everything. Name anybody, and I'm sure we can spin them.
Yeah, and we've seen that, and whether... Yeah, it doesn't stop. And I had a little list of different examples in that essay as well.
Yes. Hang on, let me read a few of them.
Sure.
Because it's epic. George Washington, he was a Freemasonic slave owner. Benjamin Franklin, Hellfire Club child killer. Alexander Hamilton, Rothschild banker puppet. Abraham Lincoln, abusive tyrant who hated freedom. Helen Keller, fake deaf mute who lied about learning other languages. Franklin Roosevelt, corrupt banker stooge, big government Freemason. JFK, mafia run, corrupt hothead who probably killed Marilyn Monroe. Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, it goes on, Socrates, Plato, even Jesus, St. Paul, St. Augustine. I mean, the point is, pick a name, any name.
Yeah. Yeah, pick any, and it's you could find.
Except the person making the accusation, by the way.
Right. Well, they're on the side of light because they're the light that's shining itself onto the darkness that is all of the things you thought were good were actually bad. And so how could they be possibly telling the truth, telling a lie if they're exposing evil? And it's really, I'm like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? If what you're, I'm sure a lot of people are very authentic and believe what they're saying when they're looking at all of these negative spins. You could spin anything, but is it true? Is the question. Now, maybe a lot of them believe that it's true what they're saying about Martin Luther King being an orgiastic rapist, hypocrite. Don't waste your time listening to his speeches or investigating what he was doing, what policies he was fighting for. Don't study the his strategy in combating imperialism and fighting for civil rights. Don't look at any of that because he's just a hypocritical racist. I'm like, okay, is there evidence to back that up? Well, there are data points that are brought to the surface. There are citations of people who said that he was, but just because somebody says that somebody is a bad thing, writes it in paper, that it gets published in a book, does that make it evidence that this person that they're telling the truth? It's in a book now. For some people, that's sufficient. That it's not simply gossip because it's been published. It's like, well, there's many books that lie to you. There's many publishing houses that don't have an interest in truth. I would say almost all of them at this point. So the question is like, well, when you look at the sources, what's the actual evidence that Hamilton was an agent of the Rothschilds? Really, what's the actual evidence? I know that there are constructs. I've seen the Money Masters movies. I've looked into the arguments that say that he is. But when you actually look at the data, look at who killed him. Look at who killed the institutions of the national bank that he created, which we are told are precursors for the Federal Reserve, as the Hamiltonian national banks. Well, just read their charter. Look at what they did. Look at what they financed. Look how they're different from the Federal Reserve, how they actually financed the building up of great infrastructure projects like the Erie Canal. Look at what his enemies did who created Wall Street, like Aaron Burr, who actually was the founder of Wall Street, that co-opted and took control of these agencies and destroy them from within. And then you could sort of get a better picture of the nuance, the drama that allows for an appreciation. Once you get that in the mind, then you can revisit some of the simplistic arguments that we all encounter trying to make sense of the mapping of conspiracies or history as conspiracy, which is much more useful than looking at it the way that popular history books talk about history, which is shit just happened because Hitler couldn't become a painter, Napoleon had a small penis, so these wars happened. It's like, that's not satisfying. But then when you look at the deeper Freemasonic, coloring shaping the real reasons why World War II happened, why did the Napoleonic Wars happen that deal with these satanic agencies, these espionage networks, these deep state structures, it's much more interesting, but it's much more challenging too, because it takes a lot of... there's more subtlety. You can't go in it with a simplistic mindset, assuming that you could just sort of fit things in a pre-existent definition that you have, because all of your definitions are all misshapen. You have to reevaluate all of your core definitions of things in order to go in with an understanding of like, well, what were the dynamics in which Hamilton emerged and did what he did and got killed doing what he did, and Lincoln emerged, developing his identity, developing his strategy with what network that he was allied with that were taken down, during and then after the Civil War. What were they trying to do with Russia? What were they trying to do with China, with Peru, building rail networks? Why did none of their beautiful ideas, which were clearly going to happen, we passed legislation in Congress in 1864 to extend Lincoln's transcontinental railway up through the Bering Strait into Russia, where Lincoln's allies were positioned around Alexander II, to continue to build up this network of this multipolar kind of world of cooperation, long-term thinking that would transcend outside of the control grid of the British East India Company, of this whole imperial structure of forever wars That was like where things were moving in the late 19th century. And then you can evaluate how all of these leading officials who were making it happen were all systematically killed. Garfield killed. All of his ambassadors in Latin America, many of them were assassinated, poisoned. McKinley killed. There's so many, including in Russia, Alexander II and the Third and Nicholas II. They were all assassinated, with so many people in Germany also going through the same fate, and France, who were all of the same orientation strategically, in China. So, I'm like, well, who was doing the assassinations? Oh, it was a lot of anarchist terrorists who were being like incubated in these weird communes all over North America, Canada, Russia, Europe, that were being seemingly controlled by similar intelligence networks to be then sent out as disposable idiots to go and kill a high-level target which would then destabilize and upset this potential emergence of a world of cooperating sovereign nation states. So it's very similar in ideology to a lot of the anarchist philosophers today who are having a very difficult time appreciating where are the good guys in history, where are they today? They can't see it.
It is no small irony that the founders of the Frankfurt School, which was obviously in opposition to the Austrian school, which anarchists typically despise, literally generated critical theory and birthed the abomination called wokeism based on this species of syllogism. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean that the idea of, critical theory is based on this weird Weberian, like Max Weber, Freudian, Marxist, syncretic analysis that was infused into our education system by the followers of Georg Lukács, the Bolshevik leader of the cultural minister of Bolshevik government in Hungary in 1919. And he, along with his very misanthropic colleagues who all shared a similar self-hating, they were very anti-human. They thought humans were just scum. They all had an intellectual framework that incorporated elements of Freud, elements of Weber's sociodynamics, and Marx's critiques on capitalism, and Marx's a lot of his ideas, his garbage ideas, that there's this intrinsic perpetual class struggle where the nature of man demands that those who have who control the levers of production must necessarily exploit and enslave and destroy the lives of the masses of laborers, and that there's a natural antagonism between the workers and those who control the entrepreneurs, and that those assumptions that those who are in elite positions, who have affluence, must always be parasitical and destroy the weak. It's a very Hobbesian idea of mankind. That was something that Marx believed was a perpetual truth that they also shared. But then they said, let's expand that and redefine the study of history, of sociodynamics, of the self-image of man around the idea that there is that all norms, all ideas of justice, of good, of morality, are all the consequence of white European males or white males in general that have been the oppressive species imposing their will onto the masses. And thus the idea of Christianity, the idea of morality, all of these things, the idea of the nation state, are just tools to enslave the oppressed, women, people of other skin colors, people who are white men but just poor. You're going to be, all of these things are there to destroy you, and so critical theory was brought in to create this sort of, I think, victim identity, or at least that was the consequence. Was a lot of people who only saw themselves as victims, especially if you were of a minority group, if you were female, if that was part of the new feminist sort of third wave feminism idea. The Black Power movement was very, Stokely Carmichael was very influenced by a lot of these ideas of the Frankfurt School as well, which then saw, well, the only way to have freedom is to overthrow the established order, and thus any type of idea that is prevalent in your society, whether it's of the Christian world, whether it's an idea of conventional morality, of justice, of the nation state, of God, all of these are just the
hierarchy.
Consequence. Yeah, it's hierarchical structures imposed to keep us down, and we should just overthrow it all if we want to have freedom and liberation. The liberation movements came out of that.
Order generally seems to be a result of hierarchy.
Somebody's got to make, yeah, exactly. Try a classroom in any school. If you go to any elementary school and you remove the teacher and just say the kids are going to like teach themselves, see how that works out. I mean, kids aren't going to start teaching themselves Shakespeare or even just learning math or anything. You typically need to have some hierarchy. Someone's got to, but the question is it going to be done by imposition, by a dictator who doesn't give a shit about the human cows that he wants to just herd? Or is it going to be done in a more lawful way that incorporates through a dialogue, through open conversation, open discourse, and participation, the participants, the humans who are not cows, who will be part of the conspiracy to make a thing happen? And it really comes down. One is more difficult. One is more easy to get things done. It's more seductive sometimes to say I want to be the dictator. I don't have to deal with bureaucracy, red tape, stupid people who have dumb ideas. I can just get things done. And maybe there's a case to be made at different moments in history where things were in a massive crisis, where you needed for at least a time some form of a strong guy to like get shit done in the moment. But is that the perpetual way you want to like forever organize something? Well, that's very cynical. If you have the idea that no, human beings can get better, that we have this innate capability to become better people, to become mature, to grow our powers of wisdom and discernment. If that's your idea, that culture can be something not just for the elite to benefit from, but for everybody to have access to the best of culture, so that we can learn to harmonize our desires individually with our sense of what we should and ought to do for our family, for our community, for our society at large. If you can do that, which I think is the purpose of good culture and good politics, is to bring about that type of development, then I think the dream of having a more perfect union of democracies is possible. And I think that actually, ironically, runs into a healthy form of anarchism that I mentioned in the paper. I would say that there are certain types of anarchism, if you want to call it that I agree with, and that I think I also have in my heart, which is that the more people as individuals culturally become excellent and can love the joys of wisdom, of discovery, of doing something productive, the more that they learn those joys are of a transcendentally superior sort than the more guttural pleasures of the flesh, which are, like it's not like you shouldn't enjoy cake or a beer, every now and again, but it's like, that's not the purpose of your identity, to be shaped by those lower pleasures. But the higher ones are way better because they make your soul more joyful. As people learn to take pleasure in that, they don't need external laws as much, because their internal compass becomes more powerful, more discern, and as the internal lawfulness grows and grows, so our will and our duty harmonize more and more. You don't need external laws that probe or manipulate people. That can dissipate as people become more free in a true sense. So that's a healthy anarchism that I dig. And I think, Ben Franklin and so many people who fought to make the world better all had that idea to get to that place, that city of God that Augustine talks about. That was the idea, is for the city of God of man to be, or for the city of man to be organized around some metric of natural law, of God's law, such that our laws would be a reflection of the divine. That's the overarching, I think, goal for the best of humankind that has been part of a good conspiracy. And then that's seen as a threat by those who disagree and believe that human beings are actually much more worm-like scum to be controlled by some master class or master race, and kept naturally in the dark as human talking cows. They don't like that Augustinian idea. So there's this tension built into the fabric of nature, right?
But Matt, do what thou wilt.
Well, then there is that, right? Yeah. The Crowley Edict of Thelema. Thelema? Is it Thelema or Thelema?
I have no idea how to pronounce it. I interviewed, what would you call it? An elder? No. Whatever the equivalent to a church elder is of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan once upon a time.
No shit.
And he was telling me all about do what thou wilt. Well, I mean, look, in a nutshell, those guys who identify themselves as Satanists are really just atheists who like to dress in drag and film their wives having sex with other men.
Yeah, I mean, there's something weird, right? Like, from what I was just saying earlier, if you actually aspire to wisdom, yeah, you should do what thou wilt. If everybody wants what is truly good because they've been culturally matured, fine, okay. But it seems like all of those Crowleyite, LaVeyeite followers just seem to be, like you said, more prone to hedonism and perversity, and want just the right to just do whatever perversity that gives them a thrill. And it's like, well, it's not. There's not a lot of philosophical meat on the bones of that thing. Yeah, I sense that a lot of this comes down to a lot of the theories in the sort of early nation state era. A lot of it stems from I cited Hobbes earlier, but a derivative of Hobbes was this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him, named Bernard Mandeville. Have you heard of Bernard
Yes.
Mandeville? You have? Okay. The Fable of the Bees. So he wrote this really influential book called The Fable of the Beeves, or Private Vices, Public Virtues. And this is like the early 1700s. And his documents, his thoughts as a theorist really became influential in the British Hellfire Club. The British Hellfire Club, it was a Church of Satan that most members of the British government were members of throughout the 18th century. It became something new. It became the Phoenix Society after Francis Dashwood's order at Medmenham Palace, or Medmenham, this basically former monastery with caverns where they carried out all sorts of ritual. This was very powerful for like 80 years. So Mandeville, and this became the Phoenix Society in like 1783 or so, run by Francis Dashwood's nephew. Anyway, Mandeville's Private Vices, Public Virtues made the case that the murderer seems like a bad guy, but that's only because of our conventional morality. But in fact, he says, when you look a little bit more closely, when the wise man, he says, looks a little bit more closely at the murderer who kills a guy and steals his wallet or his sack of gold, well, he'll go to town and maybe he'll get a prostitute. And this is directly what Mandeville is saying. He says, and you may think that getting a prostitute is immoral, but in fact, look, the wise man knows. He looks a little bit closer and he sees the gold that the murderer gave the prostitute, and she'll use that gold to go and buy some buttons for her blouse. And that will employ the button maker in the street. And she'll go buy some eggs and some milk for her kids, which will employ the farmers. And so it's actually a public virtue that you have these private vices. And all virtue is actually the consequence of private vices being permitted to just go unbounded. And the less regulation, the less national law that prevents us from doing what we whilst, from preventing the murderer and the whatever, from doing whatever they want to do, the better for all of society. So the best society, the society that is governed best, is governed least in his mind. And he meant it from a very hedonistic standpoint. And then this was added to a little bit later on by Jeremy Bentham, who developed his hedonistic calculus. This is one of the most powerful intellects of the British Empire during and after the American Revolution. And the whole hedonistic calculus was taking Mandeville's system, incorporated, which also inspired Adam Smith directly. Adam Smith was directly inspired by Mandeville. And when Smith formulated his 1759 theory of moral sentiments, he cites the same line of logic of Mandeville, and makes the point that the only society that is legitimate is societies that do not plan for the future. And he says that that's the domain of God and not of man, says Adam Smith. He says that mankind is given the desire for lust, sex, passions, food. Those are the desires that mankind has been given by God to animate his identity. But planning for where society is supposed to go in the future, that is for God and not for man. We should detach ourselves. And any society that tries to do that is not a legitimate society, which is why, again, a lot of his ideas that were then repackaged and refined a little bit more in The Wealth of Nations, published in 3 volumes starting in 1776, were directed against Benjamin Franklin, against Alexander Hamilton, and those people inside of who were leading the American Revolution who were saying, no, we should have the right to have protectionism. We should have the right to develop a local industry that we currently don't have because we have been kept cash cropping and dependent on cheap exports to the foreign markets of the British Empire for, since the colonies began. And so they all wanted the right to say, okay, we should be able to have this new type of idea of a republic nation that can direct the orientation of that society outside of the wishes of the Bank of England, of the British East India Company, that people like Bentham with his hedonistic calculus and what Smith and then later Ricardo and Stuart Mill and all of these guys who were all followers of Mandeville, even John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich von Hayek today in our more 20th century age were all followers of Bernard Mandeville. It's like that's the same Friedrich von Hayek of the Austrian school whose enemy was Keynes, you'd think, but they were lifelong friends. But they were both celebrating Bernard Mandeville. So maybe their differences were only skin deep. Maybe they actually had commonalities that were much more core and foundational that was part of a big joke that was played as a psyop onto humanity. Just like if you look at the battle of the 19th century, it wasn't called Keynes versus von Hayek as your two choices. If you want to be a politically minded person, you have to pick one, even if both might be controlled oppositions. In the 19th century, it was, Adam Smith or Marx. Pick one. It's like, well, they actually share a lot in common. And even Marx said that his ideal form of society would be one that is fully free market. He said that because in his mind, that would accelerate the internal contradictions of the system so that the system would more quickly self-implode under speculation, under expansionism, under chaos pretty much. And he's like, that would be good because then we can have our proletariat revolution more quickly and then we'll get this perpetual utopia, which would never happen because it's a fantasy land. But they actually shared a lot of commonality, or both theories even that appeared to be oppositional actually shared a lot in common as far as the nature of humankind was concerned, what underlies it, and some of the mechanisms. So anyway, what was being left out of all of this was this Augustinian system of the science of political economy that people like, the Colbertist school that generated the nation state in France were pushing under Mazarin and Colbert, that people like Hamilton had studied, that Ben Franklin had studied, who was refuting Thomas Malthus, refuting this other evil feudal capitalism and this whole American system school that every American president, like I got across in my books, every American president who was assassinated while in office, of which there have been eight American presidents, 4 by bullet, 4 by poison, and then you can add many other patriots who were not the president but were very influential as warriors who also got killed. They're all doing the same thing. They're not playing this controlled dialectic game. They're acting on something much more universal as far as the system of national economy. And it's not taught in schools anymore. It's been iced out of curriculums of the Western world. The only people who really celebrate it in a serious way, ironically, is China, because China is actually doing the thing that made America not suck, and that they're actually like applying it in their own version of it. It's not called the American system clearly, but if you look at all practical like mechanics, the use of the protective system, national banks, productive credit tied to long-term plans that increase the productive powers of labor. That is what made Lincoln's policy viable and attractive to the world in the 19th century. And that's what was being destroyed by the false dualistic options of Marx versus Smith, or, von Hayek versus Keynes, is they people missed, well, what's outside of that?
So you're effectively arguing in this article that the everyone is controlled opposition narrative is a kind of anarchist nihilism that serves the best interests of the elite.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, they don't care how much information you know about how bad things are and how corrupt things are. They ultimately, the elite, I don't want to call them that, but this sociopathic oligarchical parasite, let's call it that. I prefer that one. They don't care how much you know about the crimes they do. They really don't want you to be empowered to do anything about it. And I think ultimately the framework that is delivered with a lot of the conspiracy analysis of the black-pilled like incompetently anarchistic crowd, is that they're very good at mapping out and smelling evil, at smelling bad things and bringing that to the surface, but it disempowers people completely, so that the only option that their followers have as an idea of action is detach, enjoy the popcorn while you watch the everything burn. Yeah, maybe try to have a garden.
Yeah, it's very dark.
Have a garden. It's
very dark.
Yeah.
Why would you get up in the morning? Why would you have any joy in your life?
I don't know. Yeah, that's what kind of, I mean, I get that there's a, you could lie to yourself and say, well, I want to evangelize this kind of black-pilled gospel, because if there's enough of us who all share the same black pill and all detach from the system, maybe some magical parallel set of economies are going to occur, and we'll be better equipped to I think that anybody who does that becomes much more pliable and much more easy to pick off at the end of the day. I think the oligarchy, who only exists and can thrive by having divided societies of atomized individuals and atomized communities, they would like that. They would like more of that. So the idea of actually organizing the way we did in the better days many decades past, to take back control of the nation states, to use the nation state as a tool of the good, as a tool of offense and defense of ourselves, but offense against the empire. These things is what the empire really doesn't want. They want us to get to basically champion the destruction of the nation state, of the old order, and be incapable of resisting the bringing in of a new type of feudal social credit system designed to enslave our kids today. That's what they would like. And I think a lot of people, who fall into the black-pilled mindset are helping ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder how many of those black-pilled types are actually doing anything other than doom scrolling.
Very few, as far as I could see. They're and another thing too is the very medium that they're utilizing to spread their gospel comes from an electrical grid. They're using electricity that relies upon satellites, that relies upon hydroelectric dams, nuclear power plants, coal plants. You got a whole grid. They go to the bathroom and use the toilet. They have running water. We have little lights that come on our houses with electricity and refrigeration. Food doesn't go bad so quickly because we have refrigeration. That is all possible, not because everyone has this local Tesla battery in their backyard. We have generations of infrastructure that have been built up through the use of the nation state and national planning that people take for granted. So it's you're spreading your gospel. You couldn't do it if it weren't for organized planning and the nation state doing things at different times of the past. So there's a certain I don't want to use the word hypocrisy, is maybe a little bit heavy, but it is. It's a little bit hypocritical, or at least it lacks self-awareness at the very least, I could say. And that's unfortunate.
Matt, how can I find your article?
Sure. Go to my Substack, matthewehret.substack.com. I also have a canadianpatriot.org. A lot of the stuff that I do on Substack and Cynthia does in her Substack goes on canadianpatriot.org. Our books are there. Our videos are there. We recently did a brand new documentary with the help of Yao Media called Black Sun Rising on the esoteric roots of Nazism, past and present, which is a wild ride that we just made available for free this week. So people can go and check that out on that website as well. So, yeah.
Matthew Ehret, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jerm.
Thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you got value from it, consider joining as a channel member, which directly supports what we do here. The link is below, and if you're hungry for more, here are 2 more videos for you, and we'll see you in the next one.